Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer. This is Strange Mosaic. And a few weeks back, I had the pleasure of being on a podcast that I had never heard of before I was asked to be on it. And I found the co-hosts, to be delightful, and decided I would like to get to know them a little bit better. But I figured it would be better to do it individually because some of us are chatterboxes and others are not. And I figured and I figured the only way to get to know each of them was to do it individually. So I'm very excited to have Chris Snipes host, and I guess my guess would be producer. Are you the guy who does all the editing and producing for the show? Here with me, Chris Snipes. Welcome. I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit better.
Likewise.
Hours.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So, we were just chatting for a few minutes before we got started here. And Laura was telling you how much she's been enjoying listening to your podcast and your style. And I really wanted to say something about it as well. I did when I was on your show. I haven't had a chance to listen to the finished product yet, so I don't know what parts were in there or what weren't. But when I knew I was going to be on your show, I went and familiarized myself a little bit and listened for the first time in a couple of years from start to finish to a, sort of alternative information conspiracy type of podcast, the way that I used to years and years ago when I couldn't get enough. I had really moved away from that, but I so enjoyed everything about the experience, from your unique interview style with your wife. She's your wife, right? Hunter is your wife. She's not your girlfriend. She's your wife. Okay. That, you really let the guest speak, something which I'm guilty of sometimes not doing. But you do ask questions, and the questions you ask are always really good ones, which sometimes lead to said long-windedness of your guests.
Sure.
But also the quality of the production is good. I've been having chats with someone in the background who's like, Emily, we listen to you complain about the sound at the parties you go to all the time, but your podcast sounds like shit. Let's do something about that. And I found myself really appreciating the studio sound quality of your podcast and the obvious time that you take in between when you record and when you put it out to make it a sound product as opposed to just an information download. And so I want to commend you, because I don't listen to that much stuff anymore. I listen to mostly tennis videos at this point. Right. And it's not because I'm not interested anymore. Like that's not true. Part of it is just I'm talking to the same people all the time that are being interviewed on other things. But I think I heard like enough of the format of podcasts that I've been listening to for so many years that I just, everything runs its course. But you made something that I used to love new to me again in a way that I was so happy listening to it. I was content to listen from start to finish. I was sad when it was over, like I remember, so congratulations on that. I really
Thank you.
How did you come to do what you're doing? When I told you I wanted to have you on my show, you're like, I don't really know about this, man.
I don't think that I'm that excited. That's why I have other people come on my show and I talk to them and I put them in the spotlight. But let's see. First of all, thank you for the compliment. That means a lot. Sound, I think the reason that my production values, where I get all that from, I think I used to do a lot of volunteer community radio stuff, having tons of radio shows throughout the years, playing all different kinds of music, all different hours of the night. But then I went into documentary work. I started off by doing a documentary of a late friend of mine, close friend, best friend, who had a really hard, long life, dealt a really bad, negative deck of cards or hand of cards when he was born, health-wise. And so I said, I don't know anything about making documentaries, but I've always been obsessed by documenting things. I was the kid who had the cassette tape recorder, and I would record TV shows. I would set it in front of the fucking TV. And it was something about capturing that and filing that away and just knowing that I'd never listened to it, never went back and listened to any of it. But so I was fascinated by being able to capture little slices of life and little tidbits here and there. So I thought, okay, let's use this as my first product, or my first project as far as documenting in a serious manner is concerned. And so I started collecting interviews with people that knew my late friend, and went to his funeral and taped a bunch of footage there. And I soon found out by trial and error that sound, the audio, is so fucking important. Like, if you can't understand what somebody is saying, or it's canceled out by background noise or something like that, then you kind of lose the thread. So it's almost more important than visuals, being able to hear something clearly, you know? So I think that's where I picked that up from. That film school that I put myself through, it ended up being a 2-hour feature-length documentary. I never released it anywhere. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. But I think that's where I learned the value of that. So I wanted to make something that sounded like it could be a radio show, something that you could tune in and listen to and go, wow, that was really cool. There was a thread from beginning to end, and it felt like somebody cared about it. Like somebody took the pains to make it sound good and deliver it to you in a way that, you know, is comprehensible in some way.
Yeah. I think that for a lot of us, when we have come into listening to information that we now understand as alternative or conspiracy or whatever, like, we're so hungry. We got a taste of something we didn't know, and we're so hungry for more or deeper or farther, that certainly in the beginning, what the whole thing sounds like is not necessarily something that we're paying a lot of attention to.
Sure.
Right. And then you get sort of hooked into, almost like getting a dope hit from some of the information, and you get used to taking it in that way and whatnot. For myself, with music, it took years of me going to parties and hearing different styles of electronic music on different kinds of sound systems in different kinds of rooms with different kinds of crowds, to really become clear on the aesthetic that I liked. Mm-hmm. Right. And I guess in my head, some way, I have always thought of the two things as distinctly separate. Like, I love this information. I love the perfect sound. I love the sound of a perfect room for techno and a perfect sound system. But I do think, particularly for some people, with where information is going, which is a lot less like news and like whatever's happening that day oriented, at least kind of stuff that I'm interested in, and much more about like building our own stories and narratives, that maybe it's time for myself and others to start taking a second look at the importance of aesthetic, not just in terms of what our logos look like or maybe our background, but sound quality and different things that you can do with that. I had a young man reach out to me who's starting to advise me and help me, because he'd had to figure out sound he plays an unusual instrument, and it's hard to capture it on recording with, accurately. And so he's telling me some interesting things about like what it sounds like listening to me for someone who's into sound. And I was like, holy shit, like I'm the person I complain about. So what I remember driving home from, like, I was a gymnast and I used to do gymnastics until 9 o'clock at night from the time I was like 6 years old. And I remember driving home from the gym to my house, which was about 20, at the time when you're a kid, it seems like an hour, but I think it was probably between 20 and 30 minutes. Right. Yes. But it was generally enough time to listen to some of those like old radio shows that were like, you remember, I don't remember what they were called, but they were like mystery. They were like murder mystery radio shows.
Only the shadow knows.
Right. And so it was like, it would be on whatever station my dad listened to for news after 9 o'clock at night, like back in the 70s and 80s, news was done. We weren't having 24-hour news. So we listened to some of those mystery radio shows or whatnot. And I did like that dark tone. I didn't have to see the video. It had a very X-Files or Twilight Zone kind of feel to it. And, I think as I got older and watched more TV shows, I forgot about that just as a as a way of like inspiring your own inner visuals or aesthetic. And when I first started listening to information, it mostly was podcasts, right? There wasn't so much YouTube then. And I you know, maybe I lost something for the listening to things when everything kind of moved to YouTube. And I've been thinking about these things a lot lately. So that you had a background like in radio and radio shows, and what you said about recording the TV with your cassette tape, right? Like, have you ever do you still have those tapes?
I do have a lot of them, actually. I think I have the whole Kiss TV movie. It's took like 3 or 4 cassettes, but yeah, I got it somewhere.
Are you familiar with like found sound and all of that kind of stuff?
Yes, I love that stuff.
You probably have some really cool things in there that would be interesting for people who make like artsy kind of video and found sound stuff, or even for DJs to like use as samples and whatnot. My sister was a fan of recording television shows. Now she did it with the VHS tape, but it was like weird. Like, you know, she would record all of this. She recorded every show she watched every week, right? So like another version of that. I would record gymnastics when it was on because it was on so rarely, and I would just rewatch it over and over and over. But my sister recorded everything. And we also used to make like mixtapes with, you know, audio cassette with the songs we like, but we would always try and get them to like overlap a little bit. So it sounded kind of like the DJ.
Like continuous music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally relate to that.
I remember my sister had one that she made. Like we did this all the time, and generally the mixes weren't very good, but she had one where just a few of them just by luck were so good that like we were no longer listening to the mixtape to hear the songs. Like it was just like we were impressed with how well she blended. It wasn't really a mix. Absolutely. It was more like a blend.
Yes, right? I'm right there with you.
But there's something so satisfying about like when you hear the part you like go into the other part you like from 2 different songs, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I used to take like a boombox and record like our nights out. Like when we go cruising around the shitty little town that I grew up in, I would take the boombox and I would, we would be listening to music on the car stereo, but I would be just recording us hanging out. Like, and one time because of this, I recorded a car accident that we had taken one of my friend's dad's cars. They were at a baseball game or something like that. And we were taking turns driving it on a gravel road by our house. And we're taking turns gunning it up to 80. So it was my turn. And right as I hit 80, I hit a patch of loose gravel and I stupidly slammed on the brakes and we just went off the fucking road into this huge mud puddle. And the whole thing's on tape. I still have it somewhere. It's hilarious. It's embarrassing and hilarious, but that's gold. Some of the gold I mined.
Yeah, I bet. When I lived in New York, I lived in New York for a year, and I would always hear like fights on the street you'd hear that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I would always hear like in the middle of the night, I'd wake up, there'd be cars with their brakes screeching. I never heard the boom.
Yeah, right? I know.
It got to the point that I'm like, this is a fucking psy-op, dude. Like, how could it be that so many people have near misses and not one? The whole year I lived there, I'd never lived like that close to like that much street action before at that time, right? How could it be all of those near misses and not one boom, right? I'm like, are they playing like audio of that outside just to keep people on edge or something like that? How could it never be one? So it must have been really satisfying to capture the sound of like a thing actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And me cussing at a very high-pitched tone of voice because I was so exasperated. It's hilarious. If I find it, I'll digitize it and I'll send you a copy.
So do you also do the art on the thumbnails for your show? Or
yes.
Is that a Hunter? Yeah.
Not the I didn't do the logo, but the episode art I do. Yes, I do that too.
Yeah, it is some people are really good at it, right? My former co-host Randy has always been very good at doing that. And it was something that like I kind of resisted when I first started doing shows. I wasn't doing that at all, or when I was doing them by myself, shows by myself. And then I started futzing around with it, but I hadn't found like an aesthetic yet, or you know, sort of format I liked. And then at a certain point, a couple of years ago, someone came in and made a few templates for me, including one, especially the ones for the Project Kids and the glass bead game that I do. And I got to really, it became very important to me to like capture the right essence. And like, I feel like most of them are pretty good, but there's a few where it feels so satisfying because I got it just right for like the tone of the show. So I felt like the one that you did for the show I did with you guys, by the way, in case I can't remember if I even said the name, I just started talking, their show is called The Melt.
Oh yeah.
But it felt like with the colors you chose and the way it just what you chose, it captured the tone of the show. And that's an art in and of itself. So it sounds great. It looks great. You guys aren't doing video yet, but I'm assuming that the reason you're not yet doing video is because you haven't yet figured out how you want to make your visual aesthetic. Yes.
Guilty as fucking charged. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I want to do it right. You know, like the guy that made the logo, the purple logo with the 3D letters, he made some animations too, to go along with that. They're really, really sweet. But yeah, I want to do it right. I want to do it right. I'm a visual dude too. So I want to make sure that, you know, I'm good on my game. I'm a perfectionist, you know, sometimes to a fault. So, and I envy somebody like you. You're so prolific as far as putting out podcasts, but the way that you do them, you don't do all the rigmarole that I do. So you can just bang it out and release it in a day or two after you do it. And that there must be some kind of a high with doing it that immediately too, because you can just keep hammering them out, and you're, like you said, you kind of get intoxicated by all the information that you're processing and taking in and exchanging with people, and that allows you to do a lot more of that, whereas I only have so much time per given week to do that. So the way that I do it, it's a slow process. That's why I only put out an episode a week, but I'd love to do more. Me and Hunter were just talking about that.
Yeah. So I actually, most of the shows that I put out now sit in the can for like a bit before they go out. I have a few shows that are completely raw, that have like zero production value to them at all, that go out pretty quickly. But yeah, no, I tend to record in like, I'll record 3 or 4 shows in one week, and then the next week I might only record 1 or none sometimes. And so I'm holding on to shows. But the other thing is like, this is like the weirdest, it's an instinctive and intuitive thing. I tend to get to things a little bit before everybody else in terms of like my awareness of them, or they're bothering me or they're exciting me. Mm-hmm. And instinctively, like when I decide it's time to put the show out, I'll put it out, and someone that day will say, "Oh my God, that is so weird. That thing just happened to me today." And it almost feels like, had I said it 2 weeks before, sure, like I could have been maybe the first person to something out there, but it wouldn't have been relevant in a way that is as meaningful to people as it is when it rides in right when it's kind of for them. Yeah. And then by the time the show comes out, sometimes I'm almost forgetting what I had talked about, but I recognize that at a certain point that like I record it and then I know the moment to put it out. And then that's when I do. Like, I'm not really on a release schedule. I think you guys do more like of a release schedule. Sure. There's a million ways to do it. And I think the next stage for me, I think, is to maybe curate my mind a little bit more and maybe not have to say everything. And, even though like it's like a zoo, it's like going all the time. It's like a 24-hour nightclub or something in there. But I think that like, or maybe some of the projects they do, to have an aesthetic, and you have one that you've built this aesthetic for, right? And then once that's kind of in place, then you can go ahead and start doing more shows or different sort of, a different, like idea, but you have your kind of aesthetic that binds one thing to the other and whatnot. And so I think it's just as valid of a way to do it. And a few of the things I've listened to you guys, it's very interesting. And I don't know quite if it's just the way you two are approaching it or the way people present themselves when they are sitting with you, or if it's the aesthetic that's doing this. But you've had some people on your show that I generally would dismiss. And somehow the thing they're saying when they're saying it on your show with you feels something more to consider than I would have thought it before. So I don't know what that is, if that's the aesthetic that is making it come off differently, or if it's being sitting with the two of you, or some of the people are people who it was like couple of years ago, I decided to dismiss them and they evolved and the way it all came together. But that's an interesting, that is another interesting thing about your show that I have recognized with the little bits that I've listened to.
Well, that's great.
So well done with that.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Well done. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's the perfect place to, I mean, I love being able to do that. Like part of the research that I do for interviews is listening to people's other interviews. So you can get a feel for the person who has kind of their shtick, and it's the same shtick no matter who's answering the questions. Like you ask a question and they go off for 30 minutes straight, and it's the exact same thing they said on 3 other shows. But then sometimes you can catch like a side door that they pass up because they're moving too quickly, or that person is just going through their shtick so quickly that you can make a little flag and go, I want to make sure and pin them down on that and go deeper into that aspect, because they never, ever go into that aspect. So I love being able to do that. It's like a labyrinth, like a metaphorical labyrinth. I like finding the unlit passageways and going that way, because that's where the gold is. Everybody's heard the other shit before. So I like finding, the unexplored territory, if it's at all possible. Some people are too into their shtick, like Bart Sibrel, totally like that. He could just release his shtick as a documentary or as a radio show, and then you could just play that no matter what podcast he's on. But he doesn't really vary from that at all. Great material, captivating stuff, but he kind of just he stays within a certain boundary. And I like people that are willing to play and flex and stuff like that, and kind of maybe urging them or nudging them to do that.
Yeah, I found myself talking about something I almost never talk about when I was on your show. It was kind of interesting. It was like precognitive. Like the next week I had a psychic reading from a very well-known psychic in alternative information realms. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know who she is. Her name is Sloan Bella.
I don't.
I had never heard of her until I was covering the Elisa Lam story pretty heavily last year, about a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. I did about 6 or 7 different shows with different people about like some very strange aspects of that case that I only am familiar with because I lived a block from where it happened. And so there was things that I would know about, some of the oddities that almost anybody else wouldn't know because they weren't living there at that time. I lived there just about that time. And people started sending me her stuff and saying, you guys should do a show together. It's like, you get what you're saying is very complimentary to each other. And hers is all from psychic stuff, and mine was from my own experiences living there. And so I started paying attention to her a little bit. And we have some other connections too, because her son actually died in Chatsworth, not very far from where I grew up, right? And he had died in this strange circumstance, but I had a reading from her. And some of the main parts of the reading were about my brother, who I have never really talked about in an interview or show before. And I had just done that the week before with you. So it was almost like I was like, there were some things I hadn't really considered about my brother before that show with you. And that was exactly where she went. So that was kind of a cool, and it's just not a place I've really gone into that deep before. And so, yes, you guys do elicit that. Let me ask you, how did you, what's your origin story as far as like this information? We know your origin story as far as like sound and production quality and whatnot, but what is your sort of entry point? Can you sort of take us there with you?
Yeah, I had a few sort of scattered experiences in my childhood, and I don't know if they have anything directly to do with where I'm at today or not, but perhaps somebody else can be the judge of that. But the first one that I remember, well, no, actually, no, it's a little further down the line. We used to live in a trailer in the woods, like during the first 4 years of my life. And there was a period of time where my dad and my mom were sort of temporarily separated, and my dad went to California to work, and my mom and I stayed in the trailer, and I stayed with lots of babysitters and stuff like that. But one night a tornado came which is not a trailer's not a good place to be in a tornado. And I remember looking out of the window and the trees were just almost bent over to the ground. The wind was blowing so hard. And then I remember this dude on a motorcycle. We lived, yeah, like I said, off in the woods. So we had a long gravel driveway, and this dude in a motorcycle, which my mom didn't seem to know or be that concerned about, which was confusing to me, was riding out to where our trailer was, going back to the road, back and forth, which I didn't, it already added to the tension of the tornado. And then my mom was holding me in the living room, like, because she was freaked out. She grew up with a mom that was freaking out about bad weather and tornadoes all the time. And so she was holding me and I think maybe even reciting the Lord's Prayer or something. And I noticed a mist forming in the living room. And I pointed it out to my mom and I said, is that the tornado? Is it coming inside? And she said, she acted like she didn't know what I was talking about. And then she scooped me up and we went back to the bedroom and she lit a couple of candles and continued to pray. That's one instance. Another instance, I would go, that was probably when I was 4 or 5. When I was probably 8 or 9, maybe more like around 7, I would go during the summer to my step grandpa and my grandma's house because they had a carnival or a state fair that was near them. I would go there and stay a week, and I would get to stay up late and eat ice cream all the time and watch Johnny Carson and stuff like that. And one night we were in front of the TV, my step grandfather, I was on her lap, and the TV was in front. To the left was an entryway that went into another bedroom. Through that doorway, you could see another entryway to what was another guest room. And I look up because I heard a noise, and I saw first one figure and then 2 figures come into the room with flashlights, shining them around, shining at me. And I'm calling this to my grandma's attention. And I said, "Hey, Grandma, who are these people?" And she didn't seem to, it didn't register with her. Like, she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. So they continued looking around this room, and then I don't remember anything after that. So whatever the fuck that's worth. Later on, actually, during this time, I started being fascinated. We used to get these little books from probably Scholastic Books, which, would come to your school with a catalog every 2 months, and you could order stuff. And they would have these strange but true compilations of different stories of, real things that supposedly happened. And I was totally fascinated by it. Like, one of them was somewhere in England in the, I don't know, mid 1900s or something. It had snowed really heavily, and hoof prints were discovered over like 100-mile trail. But the thing about the hoof prints is that they would go up walls and across rooftops and then down walls. And it was like stuff like that. And I was completely captivated by that. So I just absorbed all of that I could. And then I discovered our local library had a metaphysical occult section, poured through that, just ate it up. I loved it. I'm not sure what attracted me, except that it kind of, I think, hinted that there was a lot more to reality than, anybody around me was alluding to. So it was like a peek into a different realm. So I would absorb all of that. And then probably when I was 10 or 11, bouncing on my trampoline in the backyard with my friend at night, see this craft moving in the sky. It seemed very quickly, but it was hard to tell because it was very far away. And then it stopped, full stop. And then it moved from one point to another point in the sky super quickly, and then full stop. And then it came so low that you could see the belly of it, the streetlights lighting the belly of it. And then it just zoomed away into the distance, like to where you couldn't see it. So I was astounded by that. My friend saw it too. I tried to contact him years later to see if he remembered that, but I never got a hold of him. So yeah, there's all of that. And then when I was in junior high, I would volunteer to work at the library for a period every school day. And of course, I went to the metaphysical section, and just devoured that. And I think I was simultaneously fascinated by it, but I was really scared by it too. I think some of the stories, especially of things like demonic possession, like totally freaked me out. I think, and it set up like this recurring dynamic throughout my life. It's pretty common fear, but of something coming in that you were unaware even existed before that, coming in and fucking your shit up, like just coming in out of nowhere and totally, literally in this case, possessing your body and causing you to do all these crazy things against your will. And then throughout my life, that was sort of a recurring theme, fearing that things like that would happen. But so that really made an impression on me. And then I remember probably when I was 11 or 12, somehow they edited The Exorcist down to be aired on TV, on just regular TV. And I said, well, I asked my parents if I could go to my friend's house and watch it, which lived within walking distance up the street. And granted, I was well versed in tales of possession, demonic possession, and exorcisms and stuff like that. So I had already created all this sort of catalog of images in my mind about, what that would be like and how would that manifest. And my God, seeing somebody do that, how disturbing, how fucking crazy. And so, yeah, sat down to watch The Exorcist, and it freaked me out, like intensely freaked me out. And I really did not. I was almost going to call my parents and have them pick me up at the house. I didn't want to walk the 2 blocks back to my house because it was dark and it was misty. And yeah, it totally messed my shit up. And then I think that night I woke up in the middle of the night, of course, with my lights on, and my whole body was trembling uncontrollably, which of course, like, that's the exact thing that I did not want to happen. Like it was almost like it was happening to me, like it was taking me over, and I couldn't control it. So I went and slept with my parents that night. And for probably 7 to 8 months after that, every night I slept with the lights on, and I was freaked out, on a constant state of high alert. So there's that. And then probably, I don't know, I got distracted by adolescence and being a young adult and girls and stuff like that. So I kind of just momentarily stopped focusing on that stuff because I had lots of other distractions to focus on. And then in the 90s, I think, is when I started visiting New Age bookstores in St. Louis, which was close to where I lived in St. Charles, Missouri. They had an occult bookstore. It wasn't just like crystals and stuff like that, healing meditations. This was like, they would have Aleister Crowley books and, some darker stuff. And I was totally fascinated by that. So I would just go in and just read stuff there, and it just fed this fascination in me. And then I would go into these New Age bookstores where they would have, I started seeing books on conspiracies, books on, the UFO agenda and the Montauk Project and all of this stuff. And totally fascinated by it. But I had nobody around me that was remotely interested in any of these subjects. So I was just like in my head, in this imaginary world with all of this crazy information that I had no way to verify any of it, or nobody to talk to about it. This was long before the internet. So again, I think I put that to sleep for a few years. And then I was in a very long and unhappy marriage that was not conducive, particularly not conducive for anything that wasn't confirmed by science or could be measured in a lab or anything like that. I mean, she was just totally fucking a materialist for sure. And so I kind of put that part of me to bed. I kind of just put it into like, it doesn't have a place in my reality right now. So I'm just going to focus on these young kids that I have that we had together and raising them. And so I took my mind off of it. And then as I was getting out of that marriage, shortly before I met Hunter, actually, kind of simultaneously, maybe it was like 2 or 3 months before I met her, I was listening to Duncan Trussell's podcast, and I was really impressed by that. Like, this stand-up comedian was having chaos magicians on his podcast and Satanists and occultists and stuff. I was like, I didn't know anybody was still interested in this stuff anymore. And it was very like, holy shit, like it woke all this stuff up again, stirred it all up. And then I was like, how, I could easily have a podcast. How would that look? At first I was going to have people on telling their stories, their firsthand experiences with ghosts and UFOs and just anything outside of the realm of consensus reality. But then I thought, those people writing books and doing research that I would really love to talk to, like this could be just an excuse to just have conversations with these people. So I think I got a hold of Kai Muga, a physical medium. He was my first episode, Mike Clellan, Lon Strickland, and just started amassing them. And I got probably 5 or 6 episodes together, and then I started putting them out. And that's the long story of how I got to where I'm at now.
So there's a bunch of stuff. So I want to talk about a couple of your experiences, starting with in the trailer, and then your experience at your grandparents' house, your UFO experience. And then I want to get to your sort of how you talked about, the end of your marriage and into, the podcast and whatnot. So remind me if I forget one to come back to. So a couple of things. Where were you living when you were in the trailer?
Outside of Columbia, Missouri.
Columbia, Missouri. Oh, that's interesting. And have you lived in that Midwest your whole life? I know you told me you live in Kansas now. Are you born and raised in the Midwest, or have you been other places?
Pretty much. There's been little tiny stints that I've lived other places. Arizona for a little bit, for a long summer in Europe, but mostly the Midwest. Yeah.
Where did you live when you lived in Arizona?
Tempe.
Okay. That's interesting. So in the trailer, this is going to sound like really weird, but didn't your dad's dad? So Laura's father, his father died, right? No, his mother. His mother died when he was a child. How did it go? It was a hurricane, or it was a tornado? It was a tornado.
His dad took him like ran him away from the trailer,
right?
And had him get underneath the truck.
Okay, so
stay here.
So
and then he went back, and as he was running back to get his wife, my dad's mom, the tornado came in and grabbed it and threw the trailer and.
Okay, so people who couldn't hear it well, they were living in a trailer. Her father and his parents, and her father's father, so her grandfather, took her dad out and told him to hide under the truck. And then he went back to the trailer to get his wife. But in the time between when he left his son at the truck and got back to the trailer, the tornado took the trailer and killed his mother.
Holy shit.
Right. So as soon as you started talking about it was a tornado. Okay. In South Dakota. So also in the Midwest. Wow. I grew up in Los Angeles. We had earthquakes, but not tornadoes. But what you were talking about as far as there being a mist and a gentleman driving back and forth that your mom didn't seem aware of, like there's serious anomalies related to both like time and space and energy that happen at the eye of tornadoes and at the eye of hurricanes. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard have you ever heard Dr. Judy Wood talk about Hurricane Aaron on the day of 9/11? And how that's part of her narrative on what happened with the use of directed energy weapons, that they somehow harnessed the energy from this hurricane that was happening off of the coast of New York that was moving, and then suddenly stalled out at a certain point, right? But that was related to what she says was the use of directed energy weapons. And I think she's right about a lot of stuff with that. But when she was giving some of her early presentations and she was showing some of the anomalous things that happen with physics and whatnot when there are hurricanes, like certain things being completely sliced in half, and like the stuff on one side looks one way and the stuff on the other side looks another way. This is like literally splitting realities. And then with tornadoes, the way it's like spinning around a point, that's really kind of like black hole, toroidal energy field kind of stuff, right? And it, depending on where you were in relationship to the tornado, like I almost wonder if somehow there was a time distortion in that somebody who drove up and down once, it just kept looping for you. Right. And that I have noticed for my own self, and I've had lots of weird experiences in my life, right? And some of them mixed with drug use and some of them not, that when you see the fine mist, whether that fine mist be white or that fine mist be black, that is often a frequent accompaniment or component of a deep or a metaphysical or a temporal event. That, I've had enough of those happen, that I just wonder if you and your mother were just experiencing time totally differently, hers out of panic and yours out of curiosity.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Right. And that sort of mist is kind of like some people respond to stressful events like by slowing things down. Right. And others, everything speeds up and they don't even know what's happening. Yeah. So that is really interesting. And also that you said that it was in the woods. And I don't know why, but as soon as you said that, have you seen this video of like a tree getting up and literally moving itself over? Have you seen these videos of moving trees? I
have not. No.
So Laura and I were thinking about this because we like to listen to Kalindi. Do you know who Kalindi is?
It sounds familiar.
Maybe you've heard me talk about him. So he's this gentleman. He died early on in the COVID narrative.
The intense amount of mushrooms.
50 grams 30 to 50 grams of mushrooms at a time. And he would talk about some interesting things with the trees and watching them get up and move. And, when we're doing mushrooms lately, we'll look at the trees and they do look quite different when you're on mushrooms, and they're fantastic either way. But there seems to be some level of coordinated movement that we cannot catch in our normal state, that even in like just when you're first starting, the mushrooms are first starting to come on. So it doesn't require you to be like super hallucinating to notice it, just a little bit. There seems to be coordination on the level of like School of Fish or School of Bird or people doing choreographed routines. That is sort of surprising to observe. But we had been thinking about this Kalindi thing, and then I find this video of moving trees. And what's weird is like I find it, and then like that day or two later, that becomes like a trending thing somewhere. And there's some videos, and some of them look better than others, of trees literally getting up and moving themselves and repositioning.
That's insane.
Right. And you said you grew up in Columbia, Missouri. You're familiar. Have you heard of Columbia, Maryland?
I have not. So
Columbia, Maryland was the first planned community in the United States. It's where Michael Wan grew up. I don't know. Have you had your show with Michael yet?
That is coming up Thursday.
Yeah. Ask him about Columbia, Maryland, because it's interesting where he grew up. Yeah. But we have found through doing all the episodes, we do what we call map porn, that there's a lot of connectivity between places with the same name. And I think that there is, like, if there is some network of portals or connections or things like that, I think things with like names have some level of connectivity that is just beyond the likeness of names. Right. Sure. So I started thinking about that there, but forests and woods are really interesting places. Like I see trees as the original or a more organic, like 5G tower. And then the forest or the woods or the green belt, the green area, as being like nature's green screen that lots of different things can be projected off of. Mm-hmm. So whenever you're in a forested or a wooded area or a high green area, you can do a lot of the same things that you can do when you're in like an Internet of Things type environment. It's just a different set of magic, right? Oh. And so you were in the trailer, so you were kind of in your metal box, right? In this sort of space surrounded by 5G towers and green screen reality, mm-hmm. having your sort of early temporal event. It is interesting, some people who are like very agitated by weather events, right? I'm not one of them. Yeah, like my sister used to lose her shit when there would be an earthquake, like just absolutely like freak out. When there was the big earthquake in Northridge in 1994. I happened to not be home. I was away at college, my freshman year of college. And my sister just lost it. Like she wanted to move away from the house. My mom and her went an hour and a half away, stayed in a hotel. Like she was terrified to be around anywhere where that had happened. There was a lot of damage to the house, but it was a level of anxiety and panic that I only would get to through my fear of the night stalker when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, the kind of fear that you were talking about from The Exorcist was the level of fear I was in when the night stalker was out. I was 10. I was sleeping in my dad's bed every night. I wanted all the lights on, all of that kind of stuff. So it's weird how, and that didn't seem to move my sister too much, right? I don't think she liked the idea of the night stalker, but it wasn't stopping her from sleeping at night. Exactly. Right. So it's interesting who responds to what. You were more concerned that there was a gentleman outside driving back and forth, casing the joint or something maybe, or whatever it is. And she's worried about the weather event. And you're having two completely different experiences of reality. The kind of threat that is posed by somebody doing something specifically to you is very different than the kind of trauma that comes from a large overall weather system or event. One feels very personal and one is not. And it speaks to the psychology of the person who's sort of either afraid or not afraid of either kind. Sure. Right. And there's things like people who are afraid to go into buildings because there might be a bomb, or it's weird how some people are afraid of one kind, but not the other kind.
Exactly.
Right. So you guys were having both, you seem to be having more of a curious, a sort of curious moment, and her a terrified moment, but each of you focused on the thing that you perceived threat from, to the exclusion of everything else that was going on. And whenever you have a high energy event, there's a lot of things going on. And this is why you get completely different reports from people who supposedly were in the same place at the same time. Exactly. Right. So that was interesting. But that mist that you described, I think is indicative. All the weirdest things in my life that have happened, the weirdest, maybe not the scariest or the craziest or whatever, but just wow, that was fucking weird, have involved that kind of changing of the atmosphere. And I wonder what that really is. That's one of those things that really what is the nature of this reality that the environment conspires with whatever it is my brain and the larger reality are doing to create this, this moment captured in time. What's that? There's this quote that I keep getting fixated on at different moments, that I met a gentleman on the trail one day that it was tattooed on his chest, and it said, he liked the fragility of moments suspended in time or something. It's a gentleman named Chris Marker. Have you heard of this person?
I have not.
I started to look into him. He's quite interesting too. And the way he captures realities with his work. I mean, he's a now deceased sort of visual artist and sort of scene maker kind of person. But that's when I can sort of see that moment captured in the trailer, just suspended outside of time.
Exactly.
The other one where you talked about going to your grandparents' house and that there were people examining the house with flashlights outside of the awareness of everyone else in the house but you.
Exactly.
Again, this is a case of you feeling there's some sort of threat or curiosity coming at you from others, right? It's not a weather thing or whatever. So one of the things that and I've known a lot of other people who've experienced this as well, is maybe when I went on drugs or in a sleep paralysis kind of state, shadow people. Right. Shadow people, or people that are peripheral people that you just kind of see out of the corner of the eyes. Was this like that? Or did you see real people, people that looked like you could see their facial features and their clothes? Or was it more silhouetted, but holding flashlights?
More silhouetted, but holding flashlights. Yeah. I want to say, I mean, there's parts of my memory that want to fill in the blanks, but
Right.
I'm very wary of that. You know, I want to say like hazmat suits and like goggles or something like that, but I truthfully don't know if that. I should get some kind of a hypnotic regression or something. That might be worth burying into.
I do
Or
have this one memory from when I was a kid of hiding under the bed and having this awareness that there were people outside of the house. I can't remember if I thought they were in helicopters or not, or maybe some were in helicopters or some were not in helicopters, that had some kind of flashlights where they could look through the walls of the house and find me. So
wow.
I was trying to hide under the bed, thinking that that extra layer, like I was trying to find somewhere in the house to hide that would be out of the purview of these sort of material penetrating type of flashlights or lasers or whatever it was, right? And I often wonder, like now we're very well aware that they have technologies that can do that, that can look right through, like, you know, they can see which room in the house you're in just through wall penetrating type of things. But I don't think we were at that point in the 70s on the level that, I'm sure they had that kind of stuff. But I don't know that they were just like doing public neighborhood drills like that. I don't know. Maybe they were. I have no idea.
Sure.
I lived in Chatsworth. It was weird, right?
Yeah,
Right? All sorts of weird kind of things. But I sometimes wonder if this is like a thin veil event when this happens. And when, like, okay, so did you watch, what's that show we watched? That farm in Wyoming? The range, Outer Range. Have you watched this show, Outer Range? So there's like a hole in the ground, and when people go in the hole in the ground, like they're going to like another version of reality on the same location, but there's like a correlation, right? Like it's sort of like, I'm not sure if it's like a different point in time or just a different iteration of the same reality, but the location is the same. So this guy, he's worried about that his property is going to be taken, right? And then he has this experience after going through this black hole in the ground where he's on his property, and like the cops and Homeland Security or all this kind of shit are like attacking his property and taking his land, right? Like they're doing the raid to take his land because he won't leave it, right? And so like I wonder sometimes if a lot of the fears or concerns that we have, and then the awarenesses and paranoias we have, are because that thing is happening like at a different frequency, on a different dimension, but in the same location. Is that experience like geocached there? And it could be temporal or it could be dimensional, right? So it could be that happened like at another time on that same location, or that it will happen in the future, and that all those things are sort of recorded on that space, or just that there's like an overlapping of dimensions, a la people thinking there's a ghost in the house. It's really just like whoever lives there in the other dimension, there's some crossover. And I'm wondering if like you have a particular, like your aperture is a little bit different than the other people in your family, certainly, or just in general. Like that to me seems like the same personality characteristics as someone who notes that the way you make the podcast sound is going to affect the information, the believability, or I don't know if it's believability, but the influence that the information being conveyed has on the audience. It seems like the same things that same person would note those things.
Yeah, I think it's weird about that experience that I don't remember the outcome of it. I just remember that little slice of it. And you think that would be something that I would remember the resolution of, you know, like, oh, my grandma got up, it was the neighbor, they were drunk, they were in the wrong house, whatever. But no, I mean, that's just the memory stops there. So I have no idea. Thin veil, I feel like, and I said this when we were talking about setting up this interview, and I was like, I'm not that exciting. It's because I feel like I'm surrounded by a very thick veil. Like, although I'm very compelled and fascinated by all of these subjects, and I truly believe that they exist. I think I've given you the compilation of everything that I've gone through as far as things like that are anomalous experiences. So I don't know, maybe something about that event closed my veil or made me a lot more cautious. Maybe that's where that seed was planted of the dynamic that freaked me out of something coming from outside that I couldn't have foreseen and just messing everything up or just causing a disturbance. I don't know. I don't know what to think about that.
So I think probably the resolution was just like whatever the blip is, whatever the crossover, if the thing that is causing the crossover in dimensions is being generated by someone or something either intentionally or knowingly, or that they're aware it happens, even if we're not, then when it becomes clear that someone on the other side has noticed it, right, there could be like a correction. Like I was driving back from, have you been to Los Angeles?
Yes, recently, actually, for the first and only time.
Okay, so in 2011-12 period of time, I was living downtown Los Angeles, and I had been to Santa Monica that day to go to the personal trainer, the shrink, and the acupuncturist. So, like, you're in a different frame of mind. I think the exact order was that: personal trainer, shrink, acupuncturist. So, I've had some physical adjustment, some mental adjustment, and some energetic adjustment, right? But the acupuncture being the last one, and probably like the most sort of metaphysical or the most sort of frame of reality shifting kind of thing. And then it was like late afternoon, maybe 4, sometime between 3 and 4, like that I was driving back to downtown. I was on the 10 headed east, and there was a cloud. I can't remember if it was a rainy day at all or not, but it was not a sunny day. It was kind of cloudy. And there was a cloud over downtown, like a big one, right? And I'm driving on the 10. So I'm driving straight, and downtown is just sort of to the left over here. And I see this cloud, and something starts moving out from behind the cloud. And it's like weird. It's like a city. It's like an astral city, but it looks like it's the kind of thing that you see on like a giant oil rig in the ocean, where people go and they stay out there for months and they live there. So it's like a little city, but it's got all these like weird pipes, and it looked kind of like that, but in the sky. And the moment I like locked eyes on it, the cloud scooted over really fast, and like it was like it had slipped out from behind the cloud, and it was like something was aware that I had caught it, and it covered it, it cloaked it, right? Like it had slipped out of its cloak, and which is fascinating when you think about what we deal with in terms of things we think might be in the sky, and chemtrails and cloaked cloud craft and blah, 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 blah. But it's very, sometimes you see videos of like these astral cities that people see in China and whatnot, and it's sort of like that. But this definitely seemed more like something that belonged in the ocean than in the sky.
Interesting.
Right? Which also raises the question of what is the sky?
Exactly.
So if there's like another layer of reality that understands that this is happening when we don't, and have developed a sense of awareness of like, okay, when they notice, then like that's a mistake, or sometimes maybe they want us to notice. Like maybe what happened is it just like it blipped in and it blipped out. Like you caught sight of it.
Yes.
And then you are questioning your grandmother about it. They heard that. Oops. Like if you reset the frame or whatever it is. Right. And so, you have this like I've talked to a number of people who've done with drugs, or like in just other weird states a person can get into, where like all of a sudden like there's something there and then it's gone. But enough different people who have a different set of likes, dislikes, paranoias, concerns, worries, have seen similar things in similar locations, or similar things when under certain kinds of similar conditions, that these things have to exist. And like, I just wonder if like, I'm not saying it's one or the other, but we think of everything like in linear time.
Yeah.
And we have all these like stories about like 1700 AD, 1800, pre-Christ, whatever. But what if we took it out of temporal linear like consideration and moved it to like at a certain frequency, at the frequency of that many hertz, or
Yeah.
whatever. Like if we suddenly were looking at a reality, like I had a guy on the show, I'm going to put the show out this week, and he was telling me about in his Ibogaine trip, like he went back to 1904. Well, what if 1904 is a frequency? And when
Yes.
you're in that frequency, things look like they do, like in our history books, what they say about 1904.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think there's all of this, and I don't know if it's consistently like that. Like I think we may move through, I don't understand exactly what the universe is. So I don't know if we move or we don't move, but we seem to definitely go through cycles. And at certain times, there seems to be more of this or less of this, or it seems to be of a certain flavor, or, you know, like sometimes it seems like, well, are we talking about like time travel or timelines, or are we talking about like dimensions or like spatial anomalies or whatever it is? And I think that's related somehow to cycles, and the way that the anomalies present themselves seem different based on that. So it seems like you could have been experiencing, you know, something like that. You also said you had a UFO sighting.
Mm-hmm.
We were on the trail the other night, right when it was starting to become nighttime. So I don't know, what was it, 5:30, starting to get dark. And this thing comes flying sort of towards us, down from over the freeway, coming a little closer towards us, and then stops. And then at a certain point gets up and moves away again. And it was a drone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it was moving, it had one color light. When it was stationary, it had another. But I could see how, and the reason I was able to tell it was a drone was because of, it was just light enough still. It wasn't dark and it wasn't totally light. I think it would have been more confusing if it was light outside or dark outside.
Yes.
I could see what size it actually was.
Yeah.
And I could see where it came from and that it was a drone.
Mm-hmm.
But if it were 2 hours later and it was really dark outside, and then you're also dealing with all the lights from the buildings of things like that, I think I would have thought it was a UFO.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And it was moving in that same way. Like it came down at an angle, it stopped, it hovered. And then when it was ready to go, it moved up a little bit and then went back towards where it came from. And at a certain point, it seemed to disappear. Mm-hmm. Right. It didn't really disappear. It just like went, there was kind of like a clouded area and it went over there. But I was able to make out what happened. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we didn't have drones when you were little. When you had this, we had model airplanes that you could fly around probably, but I don't think those would have been so convincing. But if you're a sort of dimension peerer througher type of person, it opens up a field for the people around you as well sometimes. But like maybe there's like a dimension right next door where there was drones already. Like I think we need to consider all this stuff when we're talking about some of these things with UFOs and anomalous craft. I'm not opposed to the idea that they exist in like the most fantastically space alien oriented way per se. Not right. But I think it's equally as likely that it could be dimensional piercing technologies, that it's just like a drone from somewhere else and we don't have it yet, but either someone in our reality does or someone in the next one over. Right. Yeah. I think you might have, you know, the eyes to see that. And then you had this scary event, right? When you, with The Exorcist that you told me about. Yeah. And like, that seems like the kind of event that could just shut someone down.
Fuck yes.
Right. And there's other people who like don't have any of that when they're kids, and then they fall on their head or they get in a car accident and then it's opened up. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so these like really traumatic events for whatever a person, what might be traumatic to you might be a lot of fun to me, or vice versa. You know, you know, Laura experienced a pretty large earthquake when she was in Los Angeles, and she's not from a place that did, but she was like, that was kind of fun. Right. My sister would have lost her shit if she felt that. Right. So, exactly. But I think that's one of those things that can happen. But I think also like when we're kids, we have bigger imaginations. And I think those imaginations, they're doing it a disservice. Like imagination, I think, is the most important thing. But also when you're little, they write things off to your imagination and make it sound small based on that. Like, oh, it's just him and his imagination again. But I think things that get written off to imagination are really just this more sensitive to like all the things. Totally. And then when we're older, like lack of imagination is a serious problem with most people. Like I find, like that's, you meet these adults who like don't really have the ability to like, they've lost that thing from their childhood that maybe they once had, right? To just sort of like, oh, who cares if it's true or not? It's fun to talk about, so let's do it, right? With still being able to like not impose that as the truth on somebody else and say, no, this is definitely true. And if you don't believe so, then you're whatever, right? Yes. So I wonder what that is. But I also noticed you talked a lot about this fascination from the time you were a kid with metaphysical and the occult, right? I used to love going to those bookstores too. There was one called the Psychic Eye in Los Angeles that me and my sister really liked going to, right? Cool. There was a few others that, but that was the really good one. And we really liked buying like weird amulets and incense and weird things. There's weird things, right? And when I was an early teenager and my sister was like 9 or 10. And we really liked that music from Twin Peaks, right? The soundtrack from Twin Peaks and
Angelo Badalamenti.
Right. Love it. Right. And we'd go into her bedroom and we'd light a candle and turn on the incense and listen to the Twin Peaks music. And my dad would come in and be like, are you guys having a seance in here? And I didn't even know what a seance was, but if this was a seance, I was like, yeah, we're having a seance.
Right? Sign me up.
Right. And we weren't doing anything weird, but we liked it on a level that was probably odd for little kids. Right. Sure. But I wonder if there's a familiarity from concurrent life or previous life, or maybe the one that we think of as next now, but they're all happening simultaneously. Or like a level of familiarity with it that comes from, right? You don't hear too many little kids saying that I like occult books or metaphysical books. That's usually something that like it takes at least into the mid to later teenage years for most kids to develop, but it sounds like you were into that from pretty little kid.
Absolutely. Totally. I think if I would have had more opportunities to absorb that, I definitely would have taken advantage of it, because once I finally got to the oasis of occult literature and knowledge, I just ate it up, devoured it. Yeah. So becoming, obviously, especially in the midst of when I was working at the library in the junior high, none of my classes were talking about any of that shit. We're not taught any of that stuff. It's just relegated to I believe the Dewey Decibel numbers are the 130s or something. Just relegated to a little tiny sliver of the library. The science section was huge. The fucking, all these other sections are gargantuan, but the little occult metaphysical section, which I thought was a much more interesting, was this little tiny little patch, So yeah, I ate it up. But very quickly, going back to what you were saying about the guy going back to 1904 and how that was maybe a frequency, something that I always find when I go down that trail in my mind is that, okay, say there is a frequency that's 1904, say there's a frequency that's 1804, all time happening concurrently at the same time. Well, does that 1904 loop, does it go to a certain point and then start 1904 again? That's the part where I get confused about that. Is that something that you've pondered, and what have you come up with if you have?
So I've thought about things like that. We've started watching Dark based on what I can't remember if it was you or Hunter who asked me on the show.
It was me.
It was you. Okay. So the show that I said, oh yeah, I think I've watched a few episodes. It was his Dark Materials. It wasn't Dark.
Yes.
So we've been, but what's being presented in that show, that is Chatsworth, 100%, like the same kind of thing. So as you see, they're stuck in some cycle that like has some ability to go forward a certain amount and backward an amount, but there seems to be like a definite start point and a definite end point, and then it's just like it resets and it goes again. It makes me think of a couple of things. So the FPV Angel stuff, like they talk about a 400-year cycle, right? Yeah. I would be curious to know. Now, like I think the idea, and again, like they have thousands of hours of stuff, and I have listened to only a small fraction of it, and I've just really sort of taken it in and intuited it and then kind of added my own sort of framework to it for myself, but they certainly opened my eyes to a bunch of stuff. I think their idea is that there's a small group of people that have learned how to ride out these turnover in the cycle, and everybody else doesn't make it. I don't know, and it would be interesting to ask them if that turnover in the cycle literally just takes us back to what seems like prehistoric ages, or does it actually take us back? Are we in some kind of closed system that just, it's kind of like when you start the video game over, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, when you are playing video games, at least now, like when we were little in the 80s, when your game was over, you was starting.
That's it. Yes.
Now they build on each other. Like now that you can pick up where you left off in your next session, right? Kind of thing with some of these games. But I think that like sometimes you'll do a hard reset on the system and just like blank it out and start over as if you've never played. So it would be interesting to know that. And I think that maybe sounds more reasonable than just like on some level than that, oh, we just got basically bombed back to what seemed like prehistoric ages. Like, what if that really is it? That it's just like, you know, maybe the challenge is, or maybe whoever created such system or whatever created such system is fascinated to watch like how far the people can get this time around, just like playing the game. How far can I get on this game kind of thing? I think that's possible. I think the other thing that it's weird, like a bunch of stuff has opened up for me informationally in the last couple of weeks. And I don't know if reality is different or I'm different or what's happening, but my attention has been turned to this idea of something called magnetic mirror fusion as a way of creating and harnessing energy. Mm-hmm. And it seems like in order to do it, let me see if I have the grid up, because what you're talking about, I didn't think we would talk about this today, but what you are talking about makes me think there was like one picture of it that like, see if I can find the picture. There was like one picture of what it looked like. Let me just type this in. Magnetic mirror fusion that started to have me, I cannot find a single like article in which magnetic mirror fusion and particle accelerators are talked about together. Okay.
What did you hear about magnetic mirror fusion?
Well, this got into like a weird memory I had of a family member, right? Because there is a family member through marriage who is a famous physicist who I was always told, and this was like something I was opposed to, was a fission scientist working on fission. I remember clearly having an argument with my cousin about fission versus fusion, right? And her father was the famous physicist, and there's not cold fusion. Fission is the way, and whatever kind of thing, right? But and when he passed away, he's a very famous physicist. He passed away a couple of years ago. I remember reading the article in the newspaper and talked about, Dick Post, Livermore Laboratory, nuclear fission, and da-da-da-da. There's no record. Now it all says fusion, magnetic mirror fusion, maglev trains, all of this stuff that I've never heard of before. And as a person who's been interested in the topic of cold fusion for as many years as I have, that I've never heard about yin yang mirror fusion and magnetic mirror fusion. But there was one graph in particular, this one, right? See this?
Yeah.
It's called tandem mirrors. And this is a way that they have figured out how to create plasma fields and like trap them. So I would imagine that field has its own sort of like temporal reality. Right. You can see I'm not a scientist or a physicist, so I may be talking out of my ass, but I'm just speaking out of intuition. Right. This symbol right here is basically the negative space. It is a quatrefoil or a Templar's cross.
Gotcha.
Right? I think Templars are time traveler. I think like they know how to order themselves in time, or they know how to order time around themselves. They're order temple orientalis. I think it's people who are able to orient and order themselves in time, order time and orient themselves in it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Have these two loops, right? And it looks kind of, if you look at some of these pictures, this one, it doesn't look that different than a linear particle accelerator, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can't find one mention of particle accelerator and magnetic mirror fusion or tandem mirror fusion within the same paper or article. So like, I don't know if they're the same thing, if they're different things, if like, I just find that weird, because I imagine that they have particle accelerators and tandem mirror fusion generators at the same locations, but why is there no discussion? Like this looks like a particle accelerator.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why can't I find the two things talked about together?
That's weird.
Right?
It's like the double identity. You don't see them in the same room at the same time.
But like, let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that this whatever this is, this plasma thing, this is plasma in the middle, and this is the end mirrors, that the space in between the two mirrors is 1904.
Yeah.
So when you arrive in 1904 on your ibogaine time travel experience, you might start at the beginning or you might hear at the middle, but at a certain point, you reach the end. Does that then become 1905? Like, do you walk through the mirror and it becomes 1905? Or does it like collapse back to the beginning? Like, is it just over? And then 1905 is a completely separate magnetic tandem mirror with plasma between. I'm literally just blowing shit out my ass right now. I don't know. Right. But I think these are things to consider. I mean, from what I'm very new into this. I've just discovered this week. Right. But it answers a lot of questions I've had as far as the interdimensional architecture and the mirrored buildings reflecting off of each other, and why it literally looks in this city like some of the buildings are built to ensure that they will not reflect in any other buildings. Now, if plasma is generated between two things that are reflecting each other and you want to not participate in that, or you want to control your own, what if these buildings are literally, the power for them is being provided by plasma fields between, like, then is the two buildings that are doing that, are they owned by the same people? So they're creating their own temporal, like, what the fuck, right? Like, it opens up a lot of things. And I could be wrong about all of this, but I think they're reasonable questions. But this looks just like a particle accelerator. And now it's called the magnetic mirror machine. Now, remember what was one of the very first Mandela effects?
The Berenstain Bears?
But what was the one right after that?
Oh, shit.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Oh, yeah, the Snow White one.
Yes. Right? So I don't know about you, but where I come from, it was mirror, mirror on the wall. Well, apparently now it's magic mirror on the wall.
I know, exactly.
And I would be really interested to know if like that was about the same time that like the program shifted from like a fission to a magnetic mirror fusion kind of thing, right? Like you'll always see signatures like this in the reality, right? But what you said, right, I think that's a really interesting question, right? Because it seems about the loop, right? Are we right now in the one, like just the longest haul of a magnetic mirror fusion kind of pipeline or whatever? I don't even know what the right words are to say, right? Or is it like, if once something passes, it's preserved in this weird, like, temporal memorial that is something like that maybe some of these buildings or frequencies grant access to, or I have no idea. But that's what I thought about when you said that about 1904. You know, and are there different ones, or are they all the same? Is 1904 different in Lawrence, Kansas than it is in Austin, Texas? Exactly. If I were to hit that, right? Like it's really, that's a really interesting question. I like it.
It's something I was thinking about too when I knew that we were going to talk tonight. Was about retro-causality in time, and how some people really focus on, let's just use an example of Tavistock and the Beatles, and how the Beatles were a psy-op set in motion by Tavistock, so on and so forth, and how really I myself, by listening to the music, I don't feel like it's psy-op music to me. It doesn't feel like there's something sinister behind it. I could be totally wrong, acting out of naivety. I haven't gone into it that much, to tell you the truth, but it makes me wonder when groups of people, which is very easily done these days with the internet and groups being started and lots of attention being focused on different things that have happened in our past, if we can't help but influence those things. Like maybe in the beginning there wasn't a Tavistock influence with the Beatles, but because of some dots that were connected and then all the tension that got put on that dot connecting and then other dots being connected to that, like somehow we've set some alternate version of that in motion that wasn't there previously. I don't know. I mean, what is?
All right, I love this. Let's press the pause button right here and move over to the supporters hour. And I would love,
sure.
I would love to. This is amazing. I would love to dig into this with you. All right, so we're going to move over into the patrons hour. You can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com, or rockfin.com/Emily Moyer to find our fascinating discussion on Tavistock, retro-causally, and what the fuck are the Beatles, really. But Chris, before we do, let people know where they can find your really awesome podcast.
Well, thank you. Everything can be found really at the meltpodcast.net. You can find the Patreon channel. You can find Telegram. All the links that you need to know are there. So we have a YouTube channel. YouTube, I would guess, / the Melt Podcast. I actually don't know that, but you can get to that.
You just find the Melt Podcast. You just search the Melt Podcast. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
And I'm hoping sometime early in the new year, Hunter will be joining me here as well. So there will be more melting going on. And I always like the idea of the mind melt or the mind meld, right? And so it's fun to do it with you guys. We're going to move over to the other side. We'll see you over there. All right.
Okay.